My name is Eulalia Rios, and at 68, I've learned to navigate life with a mix of patience and quiet resolve. This morning, I was standing in my Charleston condo, suitcase half-packed on the bed, the Atlantic sunlight filtering through the curtains. The scent of brewed coffee lingered in the kitchen, though I barely noticed it. I'd done this routine countless times, cruise clothes folded neatly, toiletries arranged, the little comforts that made weeks at sea feel like home. It was supposed to be another family trip, one that would remind me why I'd spent decades nurturing and supporting my daughter, her husband, and my 2 grandchildren. Then my phone buzzed on the dresser. I picked it up without looking, assuming it was one of the dozen reminders or boarding updates I'd set for myself. My thumb hovered over the screen, and I froze. There it was. Her name flashing in bright letters. You won't be joining us. My mother-in-law prefers it to be family only. I read it twice, then a third time, thinking my eyes were playing tricks. My heart sank, thumping so hard I could feel it in my throat. I dropped the mug of coffee I'd just poured. It sloshed onto the counter. Forgotten. For a moment, I stood still, stomach tight, palms sweating. As disbelief and hurt collided, my daughter, my child, had made a decision that erased me from what I had thought was our shared family life. I sank into the chair by the window, suitcase half open at my feet, and tried to breathe. The sound of the city outside, the gulls, the distant harbor horns felt distant, almost alien. I had spent years building memories, providing support, and yet here I was, reading a message that told me none of it mattered. My hands trembled slightly as I set the phone down, the words burning in my mind. I pushed my thoughts aside for now and returned to the suitcase, trying to focus on packing, but the heaviness in my chest lingered. I could already sense that this morning was the beginning of something I hadn't expected, and it would change the way I saw my family. Chapter 2, A Lifetime of Giving. I sank into the armchair, letting the weight of the morning settle into my bones. My name is Eulalia Rios, and for 68 years, I had poured myself into my family with little thought for myself. I remembered the day I co-signed the mortgage for my daughter's first home. The papers crisp and intimidating on the kitchen table. I had felt proud, knowing that my support would give her a foundation, a place where her children could grow safely. Yet pride mingled with exhaustion. I had balanced my own bills, my own modest pension, alongside theirs. There were nights I'd stayed up late on the phone, untangling homework problems or soothing tears over failed exams. Birthdays, holidays, and small victories had all been opportunities to show love through effort gifts carefully chosen, meals prepared, rides given, errands run. Babysitting my grandchildren had been a joy, yet also a responsibility I carried silently, without complaint. Every sacrifice felt natural, part of a rhythm that I believed defined family. And yet, in these memories, a sting surfaced. The subtle slights, the tiny exclusions that had seemed harmless at the time, now looked like a pattern. A sarcastic remark from my daughter, passed off as humor, a quiet disapproval from my mother-in-law, her influence shaping decisions behind closed doors, the way my suggestions were brushed aside during family discussions. I had justified it all, reasoning that youth was impatient, that they didn't yet see the value in what I offered. Now, in the glow of the Charleston morning, the contrast between my past efforts and the text I had just received struck me with a sharp clarity. The countless gestures of love, care, and support, some seen, many unseen, had gone largely unacknowledged. It was as if the decades of giving had rendered me invisible. my presence taken for granted until a single message erased me completely from a moment I had anticipated with joy. Bitterness swelled beneath my ribs, mingled with nostalgia for the years I had poured into those I loved. I had given freely, and yet the lesson was clear: generosity and loyalty could be overlooked, exploited, or even dismissed. My hands rested on the chair arms, trembling slightly as I realized how deeply the undervaluation had settled into my life, shaping my identity more than I had allowed myself to see. I moved to the dining table, spreading out the stack of folders I had tucked away for years. Mortgage statements, payment receipts, the original house deed all neatly organized. Yellowing slightly at the edges, my fingers lingered over the embossed name on the title, Eulalia Rios. It was a name I had written countless times on forms and checks, each signature a quiet promise to keep my family afloat. Yet in that moment, it felt like a revelation rather than a reassurance. I flipped through the mortgage statements, counting contributions, tracking transfers, every payment I had made to keep the house afloat, every tax bill I had covered when money ran short, every unexpected repair. Everything had been mine, though always framed as support. I had assumed my presence was appreciated, that my role as guarantor and caregiver mattered. But now, reading my daughter's text again, I realized the truth: my ownership, my sacrifices, my time and energy. They had been invisible, taken as given, unrecognized. I thought back over the years, the small ways my existence had been pushed to the background, the subtle eye rolls, the quiet sighs when I asked questions, the way my suggestions were ignored in family discussions. Even the mother-in-law's carefully veiled influence had always steered the household. Nudging my daughter toward choices that left me feeling peripheral, I had explained it away, told myself it was inexperience or impatience, that love required patience and tolerance. But the clarity hit me hard. This wasn't oversight or immaturity. It was erasure. My love had been treated like an obligation, my loyalty like a tool to be wielded at their convenience. And yet, here I was, still in control of the one thing they had assumed they could take for granted: the house. I leaned back in my chair, letting the shock and the dawning comprehension wash over me. The hurt was still there, of course, sharp as ever. But beneath it was something new, a sense of agency I had long deferred. I could act. I could reclaim. I could set boundaries that would no longer be ignored. My mind began to turn, considering the practical steps I had ignored while wrapped up in decades of giving. The path forward was suddenly visible, and I felt the first flicker of determination that would shape the days to come. Chapter 4. Small, decisive steps. I sat at the kitchen table, the morning sunlight casting long stripes across the hardwood floor. The phone felt heavy in my hand, a small device that had suddenly become my instrument of control. My first call was to American Express. I could still see the spa charge glaring at me from the statement: $628 for oils and treatments my daughter's family had indulged in while I stayed home, quietly managing their household needs. My fingers hovered over the buttons before I spoke. "I'd like to dispute a charge on my account," I said firmly, voice steadier than I expected. The operator asked a few questions. I lied gently, claiming a lost card. Not lost physically, but trust had been stolen long ago. The call ended with confirmation that the charge would be reviewed. A small victory, but it sent a surge through me. I leaned back, feeling the weight of decades of silent labor: the bills I'd covered, the meals I'd cooked, the drives I'd made, and realized how many of those sacrifices had gone unacknowledged. Next, I dialed Carlos, my longtime lawyer. His voice was calm, familiar, a steady anchor. I explained the situation, the house, the payments, the ownership. He listened without interruption, then outlined options I had long ignored. My legal position was solid. Nothing had been signed over. I could act when the time was right. Quietly, decisively. I made a mental list, running through the years of contributions, the financial and emotional resources I controlled, every utility, every mortgage payment, every unexpected expense, all still under my name. The realization that I could reclaim authority, that the power I had deferred for so long was mine to wield, settled into me like a warming tide. It wasn't yet triumph, but it was the first flicker of it, a cautious, steady flame. I felt a clarity that had been missing in all the years of giving this time. I would act deliberately, not emotionally. Each small step I took today, from disputing the charge to confirming my legal rights, was a brick in a wall of independence I was beginning to build around myself for the first time in years. I felt the quiet thrill of empowerment. The path ahead was still daunting, but I was no longer adrift. I had control in my hands, and that control was mine alone. I sat at the dining table, papers spread in neat stacks, a pen poised in my hand as if the very act of writing could organize the storm inside me. The house, the home I had built with sweat, careful budgeting, and decades of care was still legally mine. That fact, which I had long taken for granted, suddenly felt like a weapon. I made a list, contact discreet real estate agents, confirm ownership documents, review the timeline with Carlos, prepare notices that would leave no room for misinterpretation. The thought of alerting my daughter or her mother-in-law never crossed my mind. Their reaction was irrelevant to the process. I needed precision, not drama. I could visualize their faces. Disbelief flaring, eyes wide as they realized the autonomy they had assumed I would relinquish had been an illusion. I allowed myself a faint, private smile, a small satisfaction in imagining their shock. Carlos had explained the steps, methodical and clear. I would ensure that the sale was discreet. No for sale signs, no announcements, everything handled with calm efficiency, almost invisibly, so that when the moment arrived, they would have no opportunity to object or interfere. I made notes of deadlines, documents to verify, and communications to route strictly through the attorney. As I worked, memories rose, unbidden late nights, helping with homework. The birthdays celebrated with meticulous care. The meals prepared for weary families. The hours spent driving to and fro. Every sacrifice, every quiet act of devotion, had been a thread weaving the fabric of their comfort, yet it had often gone unnoticed, undervalued, and sometimes dismissed. I allowed myself to feel the weight of that history, and then I let it go, replacing it with purpose. I leaned back and took a slow breath. My resolve felt different now. Stronger. There was tension. Yes, a tight coil of anticipation, but it was tempered by certainty. The shift from passive endurance to active agency was complete. I could act. Carefully, deliberately, and the consequences would follow naturally. With a final glance at the list, I closed my notebook. The first steps were in place, the strategy clear, and for the first time in years, I felt a steady, controlled thrill of empowerment coursing through me. I was no longer merely the provider, the caretaker, the silent observer. I was a force in my own right, and this time, they would see it not with anger, but with undeniable reality. The morning light streamed through the Charleston windows as I moved deliberately through the rooms of my house. Each item I touched carried years of memories. The blue quilt my granddaughter had loved, the porcelain set I had gifted to my daughter, stacks of letters and photographs tucked into drawers. I packed carefully, selecting what to take and what to leave for the new owners, ensuring that nothing sentimental would be lost in haste. Next, I turned to practical matters. The locks had to be changed. I retrieved the new keys from the locksmith's envelope, placing 2 copies in a small, labeled folder. One would go to the real estate agent, the other secured safely in my bag. I felt a quiet thrill of control, the kind that comes from finally holding the reins after decades of being at the mercy of others' whims. Before leaving, I drafted the notice to post on the door the house was sold. All communications to be directed to Carlos, my lawyer. Every word was precise, leaving no room for dispute or delay. The act itself felt almost ceremonial, a symbolic closing of a chapter I had long carried alone. As I walked through the rooms one last time, the weight of years of service and sacrifice pressed gently against my chest. I thought of late nights helping with homework, holidays hosted, bills paid, tears wiped away, all the quiet, invisible labor that had kept the household running now stood in sharp contrast to the independence I was about to claim. I paused by the front door, keys in hand, and inhaled deeply. Tension thrummed through me, anticipation sharp but controlled. This was not a reckless act. It was a carefully measured step toward autonomy, a declaration that my time, energy, and life mattered. As I turned the lock for the last time, I felt a steady, reflective empowerment settle over me, a quiet certainty that, finally, the course of my life was mine to direct. The day arrived with a crispness in the air, a gentle reminder of Charleston's coastal mornings. I watched from my small balcony, sipping tea, as the Uber I had scheduled earlier pulled up to the curb. Inside the house, my daughter and her mother-in-law expected a familiar scene, one they thought belonged solely to them. Instead, they were met with silence. A notice taped firmly to the front door the house had been sold. All communications to be directed to Carlos, my attorney. I could see the moment their eyes registered the truth. Shock, disbelief, a flicker of anger, and then confusion, as they tugged at the door handle, rattling keys that no longer fit. I felt a quiet satisfaction, a steady thrill that had nothing to do with malice. They had underestimated me for decades, assumed my compliance and patience were limitless, and now they were forced to face the reality I had quietly constructed. A voicemail popped up on my phone from my daughter, a hurried, flustered message filled with excuses and rehearsed concern. She didn't know whether to plead, scold, or demand explanation. I let it play without answering. There was no need. The house, the control, the consequence, they were already beyond argument. From a distance, I observed their reactions unfold, pacing, whispered exchanges, an occasional glance toward the windows where I imagined they suspected my presence. I stayed hidden, calm, sipping my tea, letting the tension hang in the air like a fine, invisible web. Every flustered glance, every frustrated gesture, confirmed what I had known all along: my actions were deliberate, irrevocable, and entirely justified. For years, I had been the silent architect of their comfort, the steady provider whose labor and care went largely unacknowledged. And now, the culmination of all those years of patience, sacrifice, and quiet strategy had manifested without confrontation, without argument, without spectacle. The reality of my independence hit them before my words ever could. I leaned back in my chair, a soft exhale releasing tension I hadn't realized I had carried. The house was sold. The keys changed. The boundaries clear. I felt an inner calm, a silent triumph. The world they had assumed to control had shifted entirely, and I watched it happen without haste or drama, for the first time in decades. I felt the full weight and sweetness of agency and the knowledge that my quiet strength had spoken louder than any argument ever could. I sat in my living room, the morning light soft on the hardwood floors. Phone in hand, notifications blinked insistently, messages from friends and family, social media alerts, tags, comments. I scrolled deliberately, absorbing the reactions without replying. My daughter had posted a vague story. Carefully edited eyes read, caption hinting at stress and disappointment, passive-aggressive enough to suggest I had overstepped. Her mother chimed in with comments, veiled attempts to justify the situation, framing themselves as victims of circumstance. I let each post wash over me without emotion. Their words could not undo the boundaries I had set, nor erase the clarity I had achieved. The house, the keys, the legal documentation all confirmed what I had known. My foresight and careful planning had secured both my property and my dignity. As I observed, a quiet satisfaction settled in my chest. There was no need to confront, to argue, or to justify myself. The consequences of years of taking control had arrived precisely as I had intended. The tension that had lingered for decades, the worry over being overlooked, the frustration of unacknowledged labor had dissolved into calm certainty. I felt gratitude for myself, for the strength to act deliberately, for the independence I had cultivated, and for the dignity that no post, no remark, and no attempted guilt could diminish. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to fully experience the empowerment of acting with quiet authority. The world could chatter and judge, speculate and complain. I remained untouchable, sovereign over my own life. Justice, I realized, did not always need voice or confrontation. It could be silent, precise, and complete. I unlocked the door to my new condo overlooking Charleston Harbor and let the sound of the waves wash over me. The space was smaller, yes, but it felt expansive in a way the old house never had. Sunlight poured across the living room, catching the edges of the blue rug my granddaughter had once loved. Now carefully placed beside my chair, I set down my bag and took a deep breath, feeling the tension of years begin to lift. Tea became my ritual again. But this time, I sipped slowly by the window, letting the harbor boats drift past as I watched gulls wheel overhead. Mornings were for walks along the Battery, reconnecting with friends I had neglected, stopping at familiar cafes, and rediscovering the rhythm of life that belonged to me. The constant mental pull of family obligations loosened, replaced by hobbies, books, and the quiet pleasure of making decisions solely for myself. Evenings carried a calm I had not known in decades. I unpacked only what I needed, leaving behind the remnants of the household I had maintained for everyone else. Each item I placed was a reminder that I was reclaiming space, time, and energy long deferred. The harbor's reflection mirrored my own sense of clarity. A life simplified and centered around my own well-being. For the first time in years, I felt relief, hope, and a steady empowerment that did not depend on anyone else's recognition. I had untangled myself from the drama, and in doing so, discovered a peace that was fully mine. I sat by the window, the harbor stretching wide before me, and let the quiet settle into my bones. The city hummed below, but up here, in my own space, there was nothing pressing, no demands, no expectations, only the steady rhythm of my own breath and the slow passage of time. I thought of the years I had given to my family, the countless nights I had sacrificed sleep, the weekends spent running errands or baking treats, the silent labor that had been both my joy and my burden. Now, I understood what boundaries truly meant. Self-respect was not selfishness, and family did not demand constant acquiescence. I could be present for those who valued me, those who saw my love and labor for what it was, and I could remain distant from those who did not. That distinction, once blurred by decades of giving, was now clear and firm. A gentle pride filled me not for the battles won against others, but for the dignity I had preserved for myself. The house, the keys, the decisions all had been a reflection of the life I intended to live, deliberate, independent, and unshaken by the whims of others. I smiled softly, feeling a calm that had eluded me for years. I had given and sacrificed enough. And now, at last, I could receive peace, clarity, and the quiet satisfaction of a life reclaimed.